boys and girls, and welcome to St. Mark's Methodist Church Children's Moments with Miss Robin. Happy Sunday to you. Today I have a story, two stories actually, that I'm going to kind of combine together. And the first part of the story is about a little girl in first grade whose teacher gave her a challenge. Now the challenge that the teacher gave her was to take a piece of paper and make it fit over her whole entire body. Now I want you to think about that. If you think that you can make a piece of paper fit over your entire whole body, why don't you pause this now, get a sheet of paper and try it. Then turn it on and listen to the rest of the lesson. Well, I don't know if you actually stopped and tried this, but I did. And when I tried it, I thought of a lot of different things. I thought about, well, maybe I could tear the paper. I could tear a big hole in it and make it fit over me that way. Well, especially if I could tear it really close to the edges. I did try that, and I almost thought I had it, but, well, it didn't work out for me, as you're going to see here in a minute, because even though I got a pretty good size hole, and I can fit it over my head, I can't make it go over the rest of my body. And I tried several ways. I thought, well, maybe if I could try it going over my arm or on my leg, but nothing worked. Well, as this little girl told the story of her first grade teacher giving her this challenge, she did some of the same things I did. She poked holes in her paper, she tore her paper, but no matter what she did, she could not make that paper go over her body. And she said to her teacher, "This is impossible. Can't be done." Well, then the teacher showed her the trick. The way that if you look at something differently and have the proper tools, you can do the impossible. Well, the first thing the teacher said to do was to take a piece of paper and fold it in half carefully, hot dog style. And when you have yourself a nice fold, you needed to take your proper tools, which were scissors, and have those right here. You were going to cut slots in the holes. And you were going to start at the end where you folded the paper. So I'm going to do that. And this takes just a little bit of time, so I want to tell you a little story while I do this. And the story I'm going to tell you is from the Bible, and it comes from the chapter Ezekiel. That can be found in the Old Testament. Well, Ezekiel was one of God's prophets. And a very long time ago, God came to him and found that he was very, very sad. The people in his land worshiped the one true God, which is the same God you and I worship, and their homes had been taken over by soldiers from a place called Babylon. And that was far, far away from the temple in Israel where these people worship. So they've been kicked out of their homes and they couldn't go to their temple and worship anymore. And that made Ezekiel very sad. And God saw how very sad his people were that they could not worship in the temple. So he sent a vision to Ezekiel. Now, I don't know if you know what a vision is, but it's kind of like a dream. The difference is that when you have a vision, you're not asleep. So Ezekiel wasn't asleep. But in his vision, his vision was very spooky. And in his vision, he looked down into the middle of a valley. And everywhere he looked, there were bones scattered on the ground. That would have been really spooky enough. But he looked really carefully. And Ezekiel saw that there weren't chicken bones or wild animal bones. They were the bones of people. Ah! On the ground were skulls and ankle bones and little rounded bones like the ones that make up your spine, and little bones from your ear, just teeny tiny bones and rib bones and finger bones and toe bones, just all over the valley. And they had been there for a very, very long time. A very long time. And Ezekiel knew that they had been there for a very long time because the bones were all dry. They were dry, dead bones. And God said to Ezekiel, God asked him a pretty strange question. And the question that God asked him is, Ezekiel, can these bones live again? Now, Ezekiel was a pretty smart guy, and this is what he said. He said, well, God, only you know the answer to that. Isn't that a smart answer? Only you know the answer to that, God. So God said, Ezekiel, I want you to tell these dry bones to get up and walk again. Now, can you imagine Ezekiel saying that? So Ezekiel said, hear the words of God. And you know what happened? The bones started connecting to each other. You know, the toe bones connected to the foot bones, and the foot bones connected to the ankle bones, and the ankle bones connected to the leg bones, it connected to the hip bones, and it kept going until right there in the middle of that valley, there stood a whole army of skeletons. Now, that had to be pretty scary, don't you think? Well then, while Ezekiel watched, all of a sudden, the bones started growing muscles and skin, and pretty soon they were looking just like real people, a whole army of real people. Well, then God told Ezekiel to speak again to the bones, and the army began to breathe and to move, and they became live people. Whew. That is really very interesting. Well, Ezekiel was, of course, very surprised by this whole turn of events of these live soldiers walking around. But remember that this was a vision, and it wasn't really happening. But God was showing Ezekiel something with this vision. He was showing him his people, this army of people who were feeling sad and awful because they'd been taken from their home country, because they couldn't worship in their temple. And that's how we feel, I think, when we become overrun with sin. When we sin, then our souls, that's the part of us that is alive, it's the part of us that think and the part of us that feel, then we become numb and kind of dead to the world because of all this sin that is burdening us. So what God showed Ezekiel is that he is the creator and that he can take away that dead feeling and revive the army again. He did something that I think you and I would think was absolutely impossible, but with God it was not impossible. Now, back to our story of the little first grade girl. Well, when the teacher took the little girl and demonstrated how she could take this paper and make it fit over her whole body, she cut slots, first of all, strips starting at the folded end of the paper up to the top, but not all the way. And then she turned the paper over and she cut more cuts in between, but not all the way. And then she cut all the fold lines. All the fold lines she took a cut of. Okay? And then when she opened up the paper, what she had was a great, big, huge circle of paper. And what she told her class was, you know what, boys and girls? Sometimes things in life seem impossible. Like maybe we can't do it. But if we have the right tools, we can. Now I have this big circle that I can drop not all the way over my body, not only that, but also all the way over the chair that I'm sitting in. Because I had the right tools and I had the right plan, the master plan, because I'd seen it in a video, so I knew how to do this trick. Ezekiel also had the right tools. He had God on his side. God who had the master plan. With God, nothing is impossible. And boys and girls, for you, when you have God in your life, nothing is impossible. Let's bow our heads and say a prayer. Dear God, thank you for this wonderful story of Ezekiel. Thank you for his wisdom, that he knew that even though he couldn't see how a bunch of dry bones could come back and be alive again, you could. Dear God, bless the words of this lesson and help us carry in our hearts that when you are there with us, walking with us, granting us your wisdom, nothing is impossible. Boys and girls, I hope you have a wonderful, blessed week, and I will see you again next Sunday.